Welcome back after the break. Now, just before the break, we discussed the pull and push factors from rural settlement to urban areas, and that leads to rural-urban migration. It's the movement of people from rural areas to urban areas. Now, we already discussed the push factors. Now, let's just quickly look at the pull factors. Now, this is a comparison between the two. If you look over there, people was pushed away by natural disasters. And with the pull factors is, if we look at natural disasters, it doesn't have a huge impact on urban areas. The simple reason why is because service delivery is there and there's more help in urban areas to deal with a situation like this. And obviously, if droughts do take place, it's not as catastrophic for people living in houses than it's for people living on a farm that loses his whole yield because of the drought. Now, a big pull factor for young people is tertiary education and better education facilities. Now, unfortunately, when you look at rural settlements, it mainly consists of villages, of homesteads. There might be a primary school. High school, you might need to go and live in a hostel to the high school. But even though there might be a high school, the biggest one is tertiary education, to continue career, to go and study further. Now, if you look at South Africa, where do you find your major universities? Mostly in your metropolitan areas, such as Johannesburg, as Pretoria, and Cape Town. Now, there's better educational facilities, and one that we need to keep in mind is medical facilities as well. Like I said, the chances that you're going to get specialized people doctors that live in rural settlements is unlikely. Because, first of all, he needs more people to work, and unfortunately, there's not enough people to practice these medical specialities. Now, this is also one of the main reasons why people move away from rural areas, and that is because of service delivery. There's better access to services. There's actually water, there's sewage, and there's electricity. And if you look at your urban areas, you can rely on public transport, either using buses or taxis. Unfortunately, in these small rural communities, there's not much of an option because there's no public transport to rely on. So to be able to move around, let's say for instance like you have your own car, if you don't have your own car, it's going to be nearly impossible, very difficult in rural areas to get from one point to another point. Then a big attraction again is jobs. Now, if we look at rural settlements, the main activity taking place over there is primary activities. And over the years, what happened to the farms? It got mechanized, means machinery are doing the work that people used to do. So it means there's less employment opportunities. And in urban areas, you got different economic activities and different areas that you might want to go and work in. So there's more jobs available in urban areas, not only in primary activities, but more in secondary and tertiary activities. So there's a bigger variety of jobs that you can choose in urban areas. Now, housing is also a concern, for instance, in rural areas. So what pulls the people to the urban areas is better housing. The quality of the housing is much better that's been provided. And another term that we use over here, we use this often, the bright lights. Now, rural areas, because you're on the farm, there's not much to do. What do you do for recreational activities? For instance, people tend to move to urban areas because there's more to do. For instance, there's the zoo situated over there. People can go play soccer tournaments, and there's entertainment, like going out, like nightclubs, and there's more social events, like soccer stadiums and cricket stadiums where they can go and enjoy themselves, where you don't find them in rural areas. So that's also a pull factor, but especially for the young crowd who leaves after school, who finish school and especially looking to further their education and looking for social interaction. Because if you keep in mind the rural areas, not a lot of people live there, and most of the people are usually far from one another if it's a dispersed rural settlement. And then, of course, it's a better standard of living. Better standard of living is basically a repeat of this point over here. It means there's better services provided by the government. Access to clean drinking water, sewage, and electricity. Now, how can we get involved and how can we put strategies in place to stop this rural-urban migration? Because eventually what happens, these rural towns end up being ghost towns. Now, it creates great problems for urban areas as well, because you need to keep in mind, all of a sudden there's a great influx of people moving to urban areas. And what does it create? It puts pressure on the services in the urban area, because all of a sudden there's more people. Now, imagine the municipality struggling to provide basic services for the community, because each and every single year this urban area are getting bigger and the population is growing. Now, problems that we experience in urban areas because of rural-urban migration is quite a lot of things. Now, there's a shortage in housing, for example. There's not enough places to house the people. Crime rate increases. It may lead to less jobs available. And another concern is it puts immense pressure on the services that the government provide for us. Now, because of this, the government needs to get strategies in place. What do we need to do? We need to try to keep the people in the rural areas, stop moving them from the urban areas. Now, what can we do to prevent this rural-urban migration? So the government comes up with strategies, Agenda 21. It's basically ideas to make the people stay in rural areas. But most importantly, how can they improve the rural areas so that the people don't want to leave? Now, so basically, what does the government need to do? They need to go and look at the push factors and pull factors. Why do the people want to leave the rural areas? What makes them leave the rural areas? That's the questions that the government should ask themselves. And first of all, the solutions should look to use the skills and talent of the local people. So instead of getting people from urban areas and take the people from urban areas and decentralize them and put them back to rural areas, we should actually use the strategies and use the local people to improve the local areas. Now, probably the most important way to improve rural areas is basic needs. Now, that is by providing food, water, and shelter, decent housing to the people living in rural areas. Now, we need to have funds going on. For instance, if you look at what happened in South Africa a couple of years ago with the drought that we experienced, the government needs to aid these farmers. Because eventually, keep in mind, once these farmers migrate from the rural to the urban areas, a lot of people is going to be unemployed. So there needs to be some type of funding to support these farmers and these workers during these times of need. Now, if we're going to do development in rural areas, like we've mentioned before, let's use the local people. Get the local people involved, maybe help them to develop a skill. And with that skill, they can improve their surrounding community. For instance, learn them a trade, for instance, building, so they can provide building, housing for the people in rural areas. Now, like we've mentioned before, electricity and roads, vitally important. Keep in mind, for a rural area to be productive, we need electricity and we need running water and we need decent roads. Why? So that people can access these rural areas. Now, like I've mentioned, not only can we learn the local people a skill, but providing these basic needs for building roads and clinics we can use local labor. Teach these people a skill, and eventually they can rebuild this rural areas and make it a living area for them. Now, very importantly over here is food security. I just want to have a look at this term over here. What does food security means? Food security means that you have your daily calorie intake, that you have enough food to survive every single day. Food insecurity means that you do not take the daily intake of calories per day. It means you do not have enough nutrition food a day. Now, very importantly, unfortunately, many people in rural areas have food insecurity. They do not have enough food to provide their families every single day. The simple reason for it is because of unemployment. Because of unemployment, they don't have any money to buy food and to provide their families with food. Now, to improve this food security, many of these people can be subsistence farming. So they can practice subsistence farming. For instance, for providing themselves with food. And by doing that is to improve the farming methods and use the correct tools and seeds. And that way, these rural communities can provide for themselves by being decent subsistence farmers. Now, what many small South African towns have done in South Africa, they've organized secondary activities. They've done secondary activities and they've done tertiary activities. They've organized festivals. For instance, if you look at Clarence, they've got quite a few musical festivals happening to boost the rural community. So it attracts people from the surrounding areas, from urban areas, to go and spend the weekend over there. Now, if you look at the farmers in the winelands, now instead of just farming, what they've done with most of their farms, they've opened restaurants and they've opened their farm as wedding venues so that people can enjoy a weekend over there. So that attracts people as well. And with that, they're generating income for the people working on the farms and for surrounding services in the rural areas. Now, like I've mentioned, the rural population does not only affect rural areas, but also the small towns. Now, these small towns, keep in mind, if the rural areas, the farmers pack up, there's no services that's going to be provided to these people in the town. For instance, if you look at the small towns, for instance, you've got your small grocery store or cafe and hairdresser. If there's no more farmers in the community, and if there's no more employees that used to work for the farmer, what's going to happen to these small towns? Eventually they will turn into ghost towns because there's no one to deliver a service to. Now, how can we improve the small towns? Improve the roads, gain access to them, let people go and visit them. Especially, what can we do as well? Turn many of the old houses, dilapidated houses, maybe turn them into guest houses. So people can use the small town just to escape for a weekend from the busy urban lifestyle. Upgrade the facilities, very important. Make it look nice again. Make it look attractive again. Now, as I mentioned before, this is very important, and in South Africa it happens many times. Attract tourists. Now, for instance, Parys is a very small town just outside Gauteng, situated next to the Vaal River. Can be quite scenic, and people can enjoy a weekend away, just a couple of hours drive from Gauteng. So this attracts the people, and with attracting people from urban areas, other services can regenerate themselves. So people can start making money, opening restaurants. Local people might make clothes or make furniture and sell them to make some money. Okay, holiday resorts, especially on coastal areas, small rural towns. And with these holiday resorts basically opening up, what happens, the rural community might find employment over there and can provide on a daily basis for their families. Now, when we looked at rural settlements, very importantly, we look at the sites and situation. The site, if you can remember, is why they choose the area, the location, because of enough water, because of fertile land, because of grazing land. And if you look at the situation, it needs to be close to access to a road because they need to take their goods and they need to go and sell their goods. North-facing slopes where it's warmer, when it's situated in the valley, and maybe in the thermal belt to experience warmer temperatures. We look at the classification of settlements. If you look at a hamlet, villages, there's rural settlements, and the main function over there, very importantly, is the primary activities. And once we get our next lesson, we're going to discuss urban settlements, where we look at our towns, cities, and conurbations. Now, we looked at the rural settlement issues, why people move away, and that leads to rural-urban migration, the pull and the push factors. And then lastly, we look at solutions and strategies, what we can implement to make people stay in rural areas. Let's make a plan to stop this rural-urban migration, and what can we do basically to improve services and delivery in rural areas to make people stay and to make it profitable and to be able to be sustainable. The next lesson we're going to look at urban settlement. Thank you for watching. See you next time.